Will you be my date to my ex's wedding?
I never thought I'd be the type of person who would approach a complete stranger in a hotel lobby. But there I was, palms sweating, heart pounding, gripping my portfolio case like it was a life raft. 6 weeks until Junho's wedding, and the invitation sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Who invites their ex to their wedding? Someone who wants to show off. Someone who wants to prove they've moved on to bigger and better things. Someone who wants to twist the knife. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored envelope, gold embossing, the kind of paper that costs more than most people spend on dinner. I recognized his family's style immediately. Understated but unmistakably expensive. For 3 days it sat unopened. I knew what it contained. The final insult after everything else he'd done. When I finally tore it open, I laughed until I cried. Or maybe I cried until I laughed. The boundaries between emotions have been blurry since the day Junho told me I wasn't enough for his future. The man sitting across the lobby looked important. Not just wealthy, though his watch probably cost more than my monthly rent, but the kind of composed that comes from real power. He was Korean, like Junho, but unlike my ex, this man had a presence that filled the space without trying. I'd been watching him for 20 minutes, building my courage, rehearsing my ridiculous request. What kind of desperate fool asks a stranger to pretend to be their date? This kind. The kind who spent 3 years loving someone who discarded her for a woman from his own world with the right connections. The kind who still wakes up at 3 a.m. wondering what she lacked. The kind who can't bear the thought of walking into that wedding alone, with everyone whispering about poor Catherine who couldn't keep Junho interested. I remember the day Junho ended things. April 15th, cherry blossoms just beginning to fall. We were supposed to be finalizing our engagement party details. Instead, he sat me down at our favorite cafe, public enough to prevent a scene, private enough for humiliation, and explained with practiced gentleness that we'd grown in different directions, that his family had expectations he couldn't ignore, that Seo-yun understood his world in ways I never could. It's not about where you're from, he said, as if that made it better. But we both knew the truth. It wasn't about my nationality specifically. It was about belonging, about fitting seamlessly into his world. His family had always seen me as an outsider, tolerated but never truly accepted. A curiosity. The talented American art consultant Junho was experimenting with before settling down properly. That memory fueled my steps across the hotel lobby. If Junho and his family wanted to remind me of my place one final time with that gold-embossed invitation, I would show them exactly who Catherine Bennett had become without them. I just needed help to sell the illusion. When I finally approached him, interrupting his focused typing, I expected dismissal. Instead, he looked at me with curious eyes that missed nothing. I stammered through my proposal, offering money I couldn't really afford, explaining my pathetic situation in halting sentences. The shame burned my cheeks, but I kept talking. When desperation meets pride, pride rarely wins. Will you be my date to my ex's wedding? The words hung in the air between us. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times, but nothing prepared me for the quiet assessment in his eyes. Not pity, something else. Understanding, maybe. I expected him to laugh, to call security, to simply say no. Instead, he asked my name. Catherine Bennett? I told him, my voice steadier than I felt. Ji-hun Kim, he replied, and closed his laptop. I don't need your money, Ms. Bennett, but I do need honesty. Tell me why you're really going to this wedding. I wanted to feed him the line about closure, about moving on, about being the bigger person. But something in his gaze pulled the truth from me. I want Junho to see that leaving me didn't destroy me, even though some days it feels like it did. I want to walk in there with someone so impressive that his family stops looking at me like I was never good enough. I want him to question, even for a moment, if he made the right choice. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. 3 years together, and all I had to show for it was this burning need to prove my worth. Ji-hun nodded, like my ugly truth was precisely what he expected. I'll do it, he said simply. That's how it started. Not with romance, not with hope, with anger and pain and a desperate grasp at dignity. If you've ever made a bold request that changed your life, You'll understand the mixture of relief and disbelief I felt leaving that hotel with the business card of Ji-hun Kim, CEO of Kimtech Innovations, and our first preparation meeting scheduled. I spent that night researching him. The articles called him a self-made billionaire. Korea's tech wunderkind. The man who revolutionized telecommunications infrastructure across Asia. What I couldn't find was why someone like him would agree to my pathetic scheme. What I didn't know was how this fake arrangement would unravel everything I thought I understood about love, worth, and myself. My apartment felt smaller than usual that night, cluttered with remnants of the life I'd planned with Junho. Photos I still hadn't taken down. The expensive tea set his mother had given us, a not-so-subtle reminder of the proper way to serve guests. The calligraphy scrolls Junho had insisted would elevate my cultural appreciation. Each item a paper cut, small but stinging. I still remember how his mother looked at me the first time Junho brought his family to meet me for dinner. The tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The way she used her chopsticks to push food around rather than eat it. How interesting that you've adapted to our customs, she'd said, the pause carrying all her disapproval. I'd spent hours learning the proper etiquette, practiced my limited Korean for weeks, carefully selected a restaurant that would impress without seeming like I was trying too hard. None of it mattered. In her eyes, I would always be the foreigner, beneath consideration. The first time we met for coffee to discuss our backstory, I arrived 20 minutes early, anxiety churning my stomach. I half expected him not to show, for this to be some elaborate joke at my expense. When he slid into the seat across from me, precisely on time, I had my defenses ready. I'd grown accustomed to being found wanting. How did we meet? He asked. No preamble, no small talk. All business. This wasn't a date. It was a transaction. That made it easier. I'd prepared a plausible story about an art gallery opening, neutral territory where our different worlds might conceivably overlap. As an art consultant specializing in contemporary works, it was familiar ground for me. To my surprise, he knew the gallery I mentioned, had attended their recent exhibition featuring international artists. The coincidence unsettled me. It felt like fate, and I'd stopped believing in fate the day Junho told me he'd fallen for someone else. 6 months is long enough to be serious, but not long enough to raise questions about marriage, Ji-hun said, methodically establishing our timeline. His pragmatism was comforting. This was a business arrangement, not a chance for more disappointment. Junho left me for someone from his own world. I found myself saying, the words bitter on my tongue. Her family knows everyone who matters in Seoul. I'm just an American art consultant who fell in love with the wrong man. It wasn't hard to see the calculation. Ji-hun's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. People who measure others by their background rarely find real connection themselves. I laughed, harsh and unexpected. Is that supposed to make me feel better? He threw away 3 years for business advantages and social climbing. Meanwhile, I'm so pathetic I'm hiring a fake date to save face. You're not hiring me, he corrected. I declined your money. Then why are you doing this? What do you get out of pretending to date someone like me? The question had been burning inside since he agreed. Ji-hun studied me for a long moment. 5 years ago, I attended my ex-fiancée's wedding alone. I told myself I was being mature, showing I had moved on. In reality, I gave her the satisfaction of seeing me isolated while she celebrated with her pharmaceutical heir husband. Don't mistake my help for charity, Ms. Bennett. I simply recognize the pain of being judged for what you lack rather than valued for what you are. His confession should have created a bond, a shared understanding. Instead, it made me angry. Angry that someone as successful as him could understand my humiliation. Angry that even with his wealth and power, he couldn't escape the same judgments that destroyed my relationship. Angry that despite my education, my professional accomplishments, the life I'd built in Seoul over the past 5 years, I was still just the foreigner who wasn't quite good enough. Our subsequent meetings continued in this vein, professional, detailed, increasingly comfortable but always with that undercurrent of resentment. Not at Ji-hun, but at a world where people like Junho could discard people like me for more advantageous connections. At myself for still caring enough to create this elaborate charade. Ji-hun taught me basics of proper etiquette among Korea's elite. subtle distinctions I'd never mastered despite 3 years with Junho. His family had always made me acutely aware of my outsider status. In return, I shared the story of trying so hard to be accepted by Junho's family, learning their language, studying their customs, only to be regarded as a temporary novelty. His mother once asked Junho, right in front of me, when he would finish experimenting and settle down with a proper Korean girl. I told Ji-hun during our third meeting, the memory still sharp enough to draw blood. As if our relationship was just a phase he needed to outgrow. As if I was incapable of truly understanding his culture no matter how hard I tried. I expected platitudes. Instead, Ji-hun shared his own story. How he'd built Kimtech from a one-room operation, sleeping under his desk to save rent money. How the same elite families who now courted his business had once dismissed his ideas because he lacked the right university pedigree, the right family name. Success didn't change their perception, he said, with a coldness that matched my own. It only changed their calculation of what I was worth to them. Something shifted between us that day. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. We were both outsiders wearing carefully constructed masks of belonging. During our fourth meeting, over dinner at a restaurant nice enough to impress but not so exclusive that I felt out of place, Ji-hun asked about my art consulting work. Not the polite, dismissive questions Junho's circle had always offered, how nice to have a little career, but detailed inquiries about methodology, about bridging cultural contexts, about specific artists whose work I'd helped bring to Korean audiences. For the first time since starting our arrangement, I found myself genuinely engaged, forgetting for moments at a time that this was all pretend. Ji-hun listened with an intensity Junho had never shown, asking follow-up questions that revealed he'd actually absorbed what I was saying. You're different than I expected, I admitted after my second glass of wine had loosened my guard. How so? He asked, those observant eyes missing nothing. Most successful men like to talk about themselves, their accomplishments, their possessions, their opinions. You ask questions and actually listen to the answers. Most successful people didn't grow up being ignored, he replied simply. When you've experienced invisibility, you're less inclined to inflict it on others. The statement hit me with unexpected force. How many times had I felt invisible during those 3 years with Junho? At family dinners where conversation flowed in rapid Korean around but never to me, despite my efforts to learn the language. At business functions where I was introduced without my profession mentioned, as though I were merely decorative. Even in our relationship, where my concerns about his family's treatment were dismissed as oversensitivity. Junho made me feel invisible, I said, the realization painful in its clarity. Not intentionally, maybe, but consistently. Like I was an accessory to his life rather than a partner in it. Ji-hun nodded. No platitudes, no dismissal. Just recognition of a truth that still had the power to hurt me. As the wedding date approached, our preparation became more thorough. We practiced how we'd act together, the casual intimacy of a real couple. His hand at the small of my back. My head tilted toward his when he spoke. The choreography of affection without the emotion behind it. Junho's mother will ask intrusive questions about us, I warned during our final rehearsal dinner. She always does. It's her way of establishing that you don't belong in their circle either, despite your success. And what would you like me to say? Ji-hun asked, watching me over his wine glass. The truth, I said, surprising myself. That you built everything yourself. That should shut her up more effectively than trying to impress her. He smiled then, really smiled, perhaps for the first time. You don't want me to pretend to be something I'm not. Isn't that exactly what I'm asking you to do? Pretend to be my boyfriend. There's a difference between playing a role and changing your identity. His eyes held mine. Don't let them make you ashamed of who you are, Catherine. You've built something real here. There's more honor in that than in inherited privilege. I felt exposed, like he'd seen straight through to the core of my insecurity. Easy for you to say. You're successful by anyone's definition. Now I am. But I remember what it felt like before. Being judged not for my ideas or character but for where I came from. His gaze was steady. Your ex didn't leave you because you weren't good enough. He left because he wasn't good enough to recognize your value. I wanted to believe him, But 3 years of subtle undermining had done its work well. The memory of Junho's words still echoed. "We're just from different worlds, Catherine. You can't understand the expectations I face." If you've ever had a moment when pretending turned into something real, you might understand what happened next. Our rehearsals had created a strange intimacy. We knew each other's wounds, recognized each other's armor. When Ji-hun reached across the table and took my hand, it felt both like part of our performance and something entirely new. "Tomorrow, we show them exactly what they lost," he said, and for the first time since Junho left, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. Something dangerously close to anticipation. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and merciless. I spent 3 hours getting ready, each careful brushstroke of makeup another layer of armor. My dress, midnight blue, elegant but not trying too hard, had cost a month's salary. An extravagance I couldn't afford, but a necessary weapon in this battle of appearances. I'd chosen it after 12 other options, each discarded for sending the wrong message. Too formal would look like I was competing with the bride. Too casual would suggest I didn't care enough to make an effort. Too sexy would seem desperate. Too conservative would make me forgettable. This dress was perfect. Sophisticated but not showy. Expensive looking but not ostentatious. A dress that said I was doing fine, thank you very much, without shouting it. When Ji-hun arrived at my apartment, the sight of him in his perfectly tailored suit knocked the air from my lungs. This wasn't the polished businessman from our meetings. This was something else entirely, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. For a moment I forgot this was pretend. Forgot that a man like him would never actually choose someone like me. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple words shouldn't have affected me. They were part of the script, the necessary compliment from fake boyfriend to fake girlfriend. But something in his eyes made me believe, just for a second, that he meant it. The drive to the wedding venue felt like marching toward execution. My stomach twisted with each passing kilometer. What was I doing? What did I hope to accomplish with this charade? Would seeing Junho happy with someone else finally free me, or just reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal? "We can still turn around," Ji-hun said quietly, reading my thoughts. "You don't owe him your presence." "I owe myself this," I replied, the anger returning, steadying me. "I need to show them all that I survived." I thought of the day after Junho left me, how I'd called in sick to work for the first time in my career, how I'd lain in bed staring at the ceiling, his words playing on repeat in my mind. "You'll find someone more suitable for your lifestyle," as if my lifestyle was a choice rather than the reality of being born in a different country. As if I were somehow deficient for not fitting perfectly into his world. The venue was exactly what I expected. A luxury hotel with sweeping views of the Han River, opulent floral arrangements, string quartet playing softly, Junho's world on full display. I spotted his mother immediately, holding court among her friends, no doubt cataloging everyone's family connections and net worth. Ji-hun's hand found the small of my back, warm and steady. "Remember," he murmured, "we're the most interesting people here. Act like it." We moved through the pre-ceremony reception with practiced ease. Ji-hun played his role perfectly, attentive but not possessive, successful but not boastful, clearly enamored with me in a way that seemed genuine even to my skeptical eyes. I caught the whispers, the curious glances, the recalculations happening in real time as Junho's family and friends tried to reconcile their image of me with the woman confidently holding the arm of one of Korea's most eligible bachelors. The confrontation I'd been dreading came just before the ceremony. Junho approached, his bride-to-be at his side. Seo-yeon was everything I wasn't. Korean, elegantly slim, impeccably connected. Her family name opening doors mine couldn't even knock on. "Catherine, you came," Junho said, surprise barely masked. His eyes flicked to Ji-hun, confusion evident. "I didn't know you were bringing a plus one." The moment I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head, and now words failed me. 3 years together, and he'd reduced me to this, a footnote at his wedding, an afterthought. Ji-hun extended his hand smoothly. "Ji-hun Kim, congratulations on your wedding day." I watched Junho's expression change as recognition dawned. The CEO of Kimtech was hardly a low-profile figure in Korean business circles. "You're Together? He asked, the question directed at me but his eyes fixed on Ji-hun. 6 months now, I managed, finding my voice. We met at the Lee Young-seop retrospective. Seo-yun smiled, all perfect teeth and calculated warmth. How wonderful. Junho mentioned you work in art consulting? I'm sure that's fulfilling. The condescension was so familiar it almost made me laugh. How many times had Junho's family made similar comments about my little career? Before I could respond, Ji-hun spoke. Catherine's work bringing international art to Korean audiences has been groundbreaking. The Seoul Modern exhibition she curated last year broke attendance records. A fact, but one I'd mentioned only in passing during our preparations. He'd been listening more carefully than I realized. Junho looked between us, something unreadable in his expression. Not jealousy exactly, but perhaps the first inkling that his narrative about me, the American girlfriend he'd outgrown, might need revision. The ceremony itself was a blur of expensive perfume, coordinated color schemes, and vows that sounded more like business agreements than declarations of love. I sat rigid beside Ji-hun, his thumb occasionally brushing my knuckles in a gesture that seemed more protective than performative. When the officiator asked the guests to witness Junho and Seo-yun's commitment, I felt Ji-hun's eyes on me rather than the couple. I'd expected to feel pain watching Junho pledge himself to another woman. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. He'd chosen connection over connection, advantage over love. Looking at his perfectly matched bride, I wondered if either of them would ever experience the vulnerability of being truly seen. Junho's mother found us during the cocktail hour that followed. "Catherine, I'm surprised you came," she said, her tone suggesting she found my presence inappropriate despite the invitation. "I wouldn't miss Junho's happy day," I replied, the practiced pleasantry tasting like ash. "Mrs. Lee, this is Ji-hun Kim." Her eyes widened slightly, the only break in her perfect composure. "The Kim-tech Ji-hun Kim? How unexpected. Your son and I share similar taste in art," Ji-hun said smoothly. "Though I believe I appreciate Catherine's expertise in the field more fully than he did." The subtle barb wasn't lost on Junho's mother. Her smile tightened. "And your family, Mr. Kim? Are they here today?" It was the question I'd warned him about, her typical strategy for placing people in her mental hierarchy. I felt myself tense despite our preparation. "My mother couldn't attend," Ji-hun replied calmly. "She volunteers at a community center on Saturdays, teaching English to children from low-income neighborhoods, a commitment she's maintained for 15 years, even after her son achieved some modest success." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Not embarrassment, not defensiveness, but genuine admiration for his mother's values. I watched Mrs. Lee struggle to reconcile this information with her worldview, where family background determined worth. At the reception, Ji-hun led me to the dance floor without asking. His hand at my waist felt like an anchor in a storm. "They're all watching," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Show them your smile, the real one, not the polite one you've been wearing." "I don't think I remember how," I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. "Then I'll remind you," he said, and whispered something that made heat rise to my cheeks. Not for the words themselves, a silly joke about the bride's overly sculptured eyebrows, but for the intimacy of the moment. For the first time all day, we weren't performing. This was just for us. I laughed, genuine and unexpected. Across the room, I caught Junho watching, something unreadable in his expression. "He's wondering if he made a mistake," Ji-hun observed, following my gaze. "Did he?" The question escaped before I could contain it, my insecurity bleeding through. Ji-hun's eyes found mine, serious now. The biggest one of his life. We slipped out onto the balcony as the evening deepened, the Han River glittering with the lights of Seoul. The cool air was a relief after the stifling perfection inside. I leaned against the railing, letting the facade drop for the first time all day. "Thank you," I said simply. "You've made this bearable." "Is that all you wanted?" "For it to be bearable?" Ji-hun asked, standing beside me but not touching, giving me space I hadn't realized I needed. "I wanted to show them I was fine without him, that I could attract someone more successful, more impressive." The admission tasted sour. Pretty pathetic motivation, isn't it? Human, he corrected. We all want to be valued. I haven't thought about Junho once today, I realized aloud. Not really. I've been too busy. I stopped, unsure how to describe what had been happening between Jihyun and me. Too busy not pretending, he suggested, and the accuracy of it startled me. I should be thinking about closure, about moving on. Instead, I'm thinking about how much I've enjoyed being with you, how I don't want this day to end. The truth spilled out, unstoppable now that it had started. Which is ridiculous because this isn't real. You're just doing me a favor. Jihyun turned to face me fully, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I canceled a meeting in Singapore to be here today. The revelation hung between us. Why would you do that? Because I've been watching you for months, he said simply. At the art exhibitions, at the gallery openings. I noticed you before you ever approached me in that hotel lobby. My heart stuttered. That's not possible. The first time I saw you, you were explaining the symbolism in a contemporary piece to a group of Korean students. Your passion, your knowledge, it was captivating. I wanted to introduce myself, but then you left with friends. His voice remained steady, matter of fact. When you approached me that day, asking for this favor, I thought perhaps the universe was offering a second chance. You could have said something, I whispered, disbelief warring with a dangerous hope. Would you have believed me? That someone like me could be genuinely interested in someone like you? He echoed my earlier doubts with uncomfortable accuracy. No, I admitted. I would have assumed you had ulterior motives. As I assumed when you first approached me, he said with a small smile. We're both too accustomed to being valued for what we represent rather than who we are. The realization washed over me, that our arrangement had never been entirely fake, at least not for him. That the attentiveness, the interest, the protection hadn't all been performance. What happens tomorrow? I asked, the question encompassing all my fears. When the pretending is supposed to stop? That depends, he said, taking a careful step closer. Do you want it to stop? In that moment, with the lights of Seoul glittering below us and the sounds of Junho's wedding reception fading into background noise, I made a choice. Not from anger or pain or a desire to prove something to anyone else, but for myself. No, I said, and closed the distance between us. Our first real kiss, away from the performance, away from the watching eyes, felt like waking up. Like the person I'd been pretending to be, the woman confident enough to be with someone like Jihyun, wasn't pretend at all. 6 months passed in a blur of gallery openings, business dinners, quiet evenings at my apartment, and weekends at his minimalist penthouse. The worlds we occupied began to merge, not without friction, not without moments of doubt, but with a genuineness neither of us had experienced before. There were still moments when I questioned everything. When I caught myself waiting for Jihyun to discover I wasn't enough, wasn't Korean enough, wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and Junho's rejection had left scars that occasionally throbbed with remembered pain. The first time I met Jihyun's mother, I spent hours choosing the perfect outfit, rehearsing proper greetings, preparing myself for the subtle judgment I'd grown accustomed to from Junho's family. Instead, I found a warm, straightforward woman who embraced me without reservation and immediately put me to work helping prepare dinner in her modest kitchen. My son tells me you curated the Seoul Modern exhibition, she said as we chopped vegetables side by side. My English students visited that exhibition. They were so proud to see international art presented with such understanding of our perspectives. There was no pretense in her praise, no calculation, just genuine appreciation for work she valued. I felt tears threatening and blinked them away, unused to such straightforward acceptance. Jihyun introduced me to his family, his practical mother who still lived in the same small apartment where she'd raised him alone, his younger sister studying biochemistry at Seoul National University. They welcomed me without question, without the subtle assessments I'd grown accustomed to with Junho's family. He's different with you, his sister told me over tea one afternoon. More himself. I brought Jihyun to meet my parents when they visited Seoul for the first time, bracing for comparison to Junho, for worry about another potential heartbreak. Instead, my father talked business with him without condescension, and my mother treated him like any other potential son-in-law. You smile again, my mother observed when Ji-hun was deep in conversation with my father. Real smiles. Not the ones you wore after Junho. During cherry blossom season, we walked along the Han River, pink petals swirling around us like snow. The anger that had driven me to approach him that day in the hotel lobby had long since faded, replaced by something I was still learning to trust. I love you, he said in English, then repeated it in Korean, the words carrying different music but the same truth. Why tell me in both languages? I asked, my fingers laced through his. Because I want to be certain you understand. No misinterpretations, no cultural gaps. His eyes held mine. I love you, not for appearances or what you represent, for who you are. The words I'd longed to hear, but never from Junho. I'd wanted him to value me despite my background. Ji-hun valued me completely. My history, my work, my passions, even my insecurities. I love you too, I said, the words no longer frightening. Not because you're Ji-hun Kim, CEO, but because you're the man who said yes when a stranger asked for help. Who saw me clearly when I couldn't see myself. 1 year after Junho's wedding, Ji-hun and I stood in the same venue. Not as guests but as the couple exchanging vows. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. How my desperate attempt to save face at an ex's wedding had led me here, to my own. We combined traditions, elements of a Korean ceremony alongside American customs, reflecting the bridge we'd built between our worlds. My parents glowing with pride. Ji-hun's mother shedding quiet tears. Our guests a mixture of art world colleagues, tech industry leaders, childhood friends, and family. Junho wasn't invited, not out of lingering resentment, but because he belonged to a different chapter. One that had needed to end before this one could begin. Ji-hun's vows mixed Korean and English, speaking about unexpected meetings and second chances. About recognizing in me a kindred spirit who understood both struggle and triumph. About crossing worlds to find home in a person rather than a place. My vows acknowledged the unusual beginning. How anger had led to healing. How pretense had revealed truth. I asked you to help me prove my worth to others, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion. Instead, you helped me recognize it for myself. What began as performance became the most authentic relationship I've ever known. Years later, when people ask how we met, we tell the truth. That I approached him in a hotel lobby, desperate and hurting, asking a stranger to be my date to my ex's wedding. That he said yes, for reasons neither of us fully understood at the time. That what began as pretense quickly became real. For Ji-hun, the story is about taking chances on unusual opportunities. I almost said no, he admits, still amazed at how differently our lives might have unfolded. My assistant thought I was having a breakdown when I told her I'd agreed to be someone's fake date. For me, it's about learning that real connection comes when you stop performing, when you allow yourself to be seen completely, strengths and weaknesses past and present. It's about recognizing that sometimes we find love not when we're trying to prove our worth, but when we find someone who never questioned it in the first place. If this story of crossing cultural bridges and finding authentic love in unexpected places touched your heart, remember that sometimes pain leads us exactly where we need to go. Sometimes the most unlikely beginnings create the most extraordinary love stories. And sometimes, saying yes to a desperate request from a stranger might just be saying yes to the rest of your life. The anger and humiliation that drove me to approach Ji-hun that day haven't disappeared entirely. They've transformed into gratitude. Not for Junho's rejection, which still stings when I let myself remember, but for the courage desperation gave me. For the chance it created to find someone who values me for exactly who I am, not despite it or because of it, but completely. We still attend weddings sometimes, Ji-hun and I, but the recognition of yourself in another person's eyes, and the courage to believe what you see there,